In the previous section, we examined how duress, undue influence, misrepresentation, and fraud can undermine the fairness and enforceability of real estate contracts. These concepts all hinge on one crucial idea: that contracts are only binding when they represent the free, voluntary, and knowing consent of all competent parties. Building upon that understanding, this section explores how marital status and mental capacity influence a person's ability to enter into legally binding real estate agreements under Arizona law. In Arizona, a person's marital status directly affects their authority to transfer, encumber, or acquire real property because of the state's community property laws. Under ARS, paragraph 25 to 11, any property acquired by either spouse during marriage is presumed to be community property, belonging equally to both. This means that both spouses generally must consent in writing to any sale, mortgage, or conveyance of community property for the transaction to be enforceable. If only one spouse signs a purchase contract or deed involving community property, the contract may be considered invalid or unenforceable against the non-signing spouse. For example, if a married couple owns a Phoenix home as community property and the husband alone signs a listing agreement and purchase contract, the sale cannot legally proceed unless the wife also signs. Even if the husband insists he is authorized to act for both, the buyer may face title defects later. Arizona courts have consistently ruled that one spouse cannot unilaterally convey community property without the other's written consent, as demonstrated in Rogers v. Bryan, Arizona 1959, where a sale was set aside because only one spouse had executed the agreement. What Bryan alleged was that Rogers applied pressure during negotiations that led Bryan to enter into the agreement, and Bryan later argued that this pressure invalidated his consent. However, the Arizona Supreme Court found that Rogers' conduct amounted to hard bargaining and persuasion, not threats, coercion, or unlawful pressure. There was no evidence of threats, force, intimidation, or abuse of a confidential relationship, and Bryan acted voluntarily and with the ability to refuse. However, when the property is sole and separate, owned by one spouse before marriage, or received as a gift or inheritance, that spouse may sell or encumber it independently. Yet even in such cases, lenders or title companies often require the non-owning spouse to sign a disclaimer deed to confirm they have no community interest in the property. This is standard practice in Arizona to avoid disputes regarding community property claims and to ensure clean title transfer. In addition to marital status, mental capacity is another vital determinant of contract enforceability. To enter into a valid real estate contract, a person must have sufficient mental ability to understand the nature and consequences of their actions. This standard does not require perfect judgment or intelligence, but it does require comprehension of the transaction's essential terms. What property is being sold? At what price, and to whom? If a party lacks mental capacity at the time of signing, the contract is voidable. Mental incapacity may result from cognitive impairment, illness, intoxication, or any condition preventing rational decision-making. In Stewart v. Woodruff, Arizona Aptors 1982, the court held that a contract entered into by a party suffering from diminished mental capacity due to age and undue influence could be rescinded. Similarly, under Arizona common law, if a person is declared legally incompetent or placed under guardianship, they cannot execute a binding real estate contract without the guardian's consent and court approval. Consider a case where an elderly seller suffering from dementia signs a purchase contract to sell her Tucson home at half its value. Later, her adult children contest the sale, claiming she lacked capacity to understand the agreement. The court may invalidate the contract if medical evidence confirms her inability to comprehend its nature at the time of signing. Conversely, if the seller understood the transaction and acted voluntarily, the contract remains enforceable even if her decision appears unwise. Real estate professionals play a vital role in identifying potential capacity issues. The Commissioner's rules, specifically R4 to 20 1101A and I, require brokers and salespersons to exercise reasonable care and ensure that all parties to a transaction have the legal capacity to act. If an agent suspects incapacity or undue influence, they must take steps to verify authority or seek legal guidance before proceeding. Failing to do so may expose the broker to liability and disciplinary action under ARS, paragraph 32, 12153, for negligent or dishonest conduct. When both marital and mental capacity factors are present, the situation can become especially complex. For example, if one spouse is declared incapacitated, the other cannot automatically sell or refinance community property without a court-appointed conservatorship or power of attorney. Transactions completed without proper authority are subject to cancellation and may trigger title insurance disputes. Title companies often require certified documentation proving that the acting spouse or guardian has legal authority to sign. Discussion: why must both spouses typically sign contracts involving community property in Arizona? Answer: because community property belongs equally to both spouses, and both must provide written consent for any transfer or encumbrance to ensure the transaction's legality and enforceability. What happens if a person signs a real estate contract while mentally incapacitated? Answer: the contract may be voidable because the person lacked the mental capacity to understand the nature and consequences of their actions at the time of signing. What responsibilities do real estate agents have when dealing with potential capacity or marital authority issues? Answer: agents must verify legal authority, ensure all necessary signatures are obtained, and exercise reasonable care to prevent invalid or contested transactions. Review summary: the enforceability of a real estate contract in Arizona depends not only on the essential elements of offer, acceptance, and consideration, but also on the legal and mental capacity of the parties involved. Marital status determines ownership rights under community property law, requiring both spouses' written consent to transfer or encumber jointly held property. Mental capacity ensures that parties understand the transaction's meaning and consequences, preventing exploitation of vulnerable individuals. Contracts signed by a mentally incompetent person or by only one spouse when both have an interest are generally voidable or unenforceable. Real estate professionals must be vigilant in recognizing and addressing these issues, as compliance with statutory and ethical standards preserves fairness, protects consumers, and ensures the validity of property transactions.